pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consideration and approval, or approval of the agenda in a minute. Consideration and approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Alright, consideration and approval of the minutes from the November board meeting.
Move to approve as presented.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And consideration of the college financial report.
Alright, page 7 of your board book, we look at the comparison of this fiscal year compared to the previous fiscal year. This is as of September 30th. So that's through the first quarter of our fiscal year. So you can see on the revenue there on page 7, the tuition and fees. That's really, as of September, that's really just going to have your, mainly your fall numbers, just a little bit of spring. Our spring enrollment has been financially about tracking with our budget. Even though enrollment is down, we budgeted for enrollment decrease, so we're running about right on that. We've not reflected here, but you'll see in next month's numbers, you'll see the state appropriations also start to catch up. They did reduce the remainder of our state appropriation funds, so we'll see that they'll spread out that extra over our remaining months, so we'll see that kind of category catch up as well. The next page, looking at expenses, this time of the year pretty comparable to the last fiscal year. We do have a number of vacancies, so salaries and benefits is a little below the previous fiscal year due to those vacancies. Other areas you can see are fairly comparable. And then finally on page 9, revenues minus expenses were actually just slightly ahead of where we were this time last fiscal year. And then if you'll turn to page 12, looking at budget to actual, these numbers are as of October, so that's a third of the fiscal year, 4 months in. Again, you can see tuition and fees tracking against budget quite well with our enrollment. Again, having budgeted that increase in enrollment, so I think we're in good shape there. Same thing with government appropriations, which will be your state aid category. We'll see that begin to pick up here in the next month or so, as well as non-operating revenue. Biggest chunk of that is your local property taxes, and those usually start coming in January. So we're just now starting to get that money in, so we'll see that category go up quite a bit in the next month as well. The bottom half of that page, looking at expenses, sort of using that 33% is our guide. You can see that most categories are right there along that target. Scholarships, of course, are a little bit more half and half, so they don't quite follow that same pattern, but they're where we would expect them to be. Following that, then on page 14, you see our capital budget projects there. I'm sure the President's report will include an update on those projects and where we're at with those. And then on page 17, looking at our cash position, very typical of where we are at this point in the fiscal year, with about half in operational cash of our total cash position. Following that, then we have, that last one, you see page 17 is as of the 1st of December, and page 20 is as of the 1st of January. Not a huge change from one to the other there. Not a whole lot going on over that month in December. So not a huge shift there. Then following that, you can see our list of CDs that we have, both as investments as well as for scholarships and endowments. And it looks like on page 23, we did have one mature at First Missouri State Bank, and then we awarded that to the highest we do have a pretty good increase, even with the low bid from the previous, year, and that's a function of our experience rating. We had a number of claims, for both, or for the basic policy. So our current policy is at a zero deductible, so we will remain with that at the zero deductible, for the basic, and then you also have a catastrophic policy on top of that. So, at the low bid that we're, recommending with Gallagher, we are looking at a $17,000 increase from last fiscal year. And that concludes my report. Any questions?
Any discussion?
I'm just looking at the care stuff, trying to digest that for a second. How much do we still have to spend on the care money?
I don't have that in front of me, but off the top of my head, there should be around about $2 million.
Are you getting that?
We're, that's just obligated, it's just not spent yet, or we don't know what we're doing with it yet, or?
We are evaluating projects
Gotcha.
to determine that they are eligible. So with the inclusion of the next round of CARES, which we're still trying to find out about, then strategically making decisions about which pieces go where to best allocate and utilize those funds.
Good deal.
Alright, any further discussion?
On your bids for student policies, the Gallagher bid is the Star Indemnity and Mutual Omaha at the top.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you say it again.
The Gallagher bid you're talking about accepting, that's identified up here as Star Indemnity and Mutual Omaha.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, so Gallagher's the broker, and they handle the bidding process, and they receive bids from all of the companies listed. And then the winning bid on that,
Right, so if you're
Star,
basing, yeah, it would be Star,
for
and then if you're
accident.
catastrophic, would be Omaha.
usually one on that.
Thank you.
And Charlotte, you said the reason that it went up so much is because we had several claims?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a function of our experience rating.
Alright, any other questions or discussion?
Make a motion to accept the financials.
I'll second that motion.
Alright, all in favor? Alright, Dr. Payne, President's report.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. So, starting with spring convocation, we handled spring convocation somewhat differently this year. Given where the pandemic is, the decision was made to do the entire convocation as a virtual event. So, we were able to broadcast from the boardroom, got quite a bit of positive feedback as to how that worked, and then followed that with a virtual faculty meeting. But everybody was able to kick off to a good start into the registration week, which leads to, of course, the first day of classes, which were yesterday. So classes came off with relatively little issue. So we are still under a full mask mandate. We are operating that way. People are very compliant with the mask requirements and all of the processes that we have put in place. We did see a slight uptick in the first week in some positive COVID cases, but that was expected after the holidays. We have a very well refined process for that at this point, and we've worked everyone through the process, and we're now standing as of the first day of classes with 5 COVID cases. So that's where we're at, where we'll start counting again for this semester. It begins with the first day of classes, and we will continue to progress through the entire semester, keeping the tally sheet on the website for anybody that is concerned. We have actually been very fortunate last semester and going into this semester as compared to some of our sister colleges who have had a lot more issue with this. The faculty and staff and the students have done an exemplary job of following the protocol, keeping everything as safe as possible. And what we experience the most of are students and members of staff and faculty being quarantined because of exposure not related to the college environment. And that really has been the biggest impact that there has been on us. In looking at, we had 601 students in the past semester who were impacted in some way. They had to be quarantined, or they had to go remote on class, or they had a positive case. The vast majority of those were quarantines because of suspected exposure. Out of that total population, 68% successfully completed all of their classes. So while that does not sound like a huge success rate, I want you to consider that we had at least one student that I'm familiar with that was quarantined 4 times in 16 weeks because of exposure. So they completed all of their classes successfully while only being able to attend a few weeks of actual face-to-face instruction. So what that tells me is our faculty and support staff have done an absolutely outstanding job of taking care of our students and pulling them across the finish line. I cannot speak enough about the work that everyone here has done that has brought us to this successful point thus far. Follow that by first day of classes in a normal semester without pandemic is somewhat hectic. And this one went as smooth as any first day start that I have seen. So everyone should be very proud of the performance that we have seen. It is really an incredible response to this. I would put our response in the way everyone here has reacted to this and attacked the problem against any other institution that is out there. We have really done this well. And the biggest thing that the message of convocation was is, we have this, we got this, we can handle this, we've proven we can handle this, we don't have to worry about the spring, we just have to keep going as we're going. So moving on from that, let's take a little look at enrollment. So that's where we stand as of this morning. We are 5.6% down in in credit hour production. A little more than that in headcount, which tells you that we have fewer individual students, but in general they are taking more classes. This is following a fairly standard pattern, as I think you'll see. And I'll get into that in a moment. But here's where in fall we had the most significant change. We saw an incredible shift in what kind of classes our students were taking. So traditionally, online enrollment accounts for about 25% of our credit hours. And we're seeing that up to about 48% of our credit hours now. So a huge increase in online classes. That was anticipated, we planned for it, we worked really hard to make sure that we had those offerings out there. And this huge shift, I would attribute totally to the pandemic. So it's students making the choice, I'm going to come to school virtually instead of face to face. We also saw a significant increase in our online only students. So to be expected, but it's a big piece. The question that this brings up then is, well, what do we think happens in the future? So in talking to everybody and really trying to look at what's the long-term impact of this, I do not necessarily think that we will continue with this strong pattern. I think we're going to settle out when this is all said and done somewhere between where we were at 25% of our credit hours being online and where we are now with almost half of our credit hours being online. I think we're going to see a long-term structural shift in the type of coursework that our students are taking. And to prepare for that, we will continue to improve and expand our online offerings. And we will also figure out new and better ways to do virtual face-to-face classes. So we've gotten really good at this really fast, and it's pretty popular with our students. So we've learned a lot about how to do things differently during the pandemic, in instruction specifically, but across the board. And we will retain those skill sets and those abilities after the pandemic has subsided. So those patterns are going to continue, just probably not to the greatest degree that we see here. And if you look at the overall enrollment trends, so here's the college's enrollments for the last 20 years. And these are fall headcount numbers, so this is individual bodies. You can see that pattern, except for the spike 2003, 2004, that pattern almost exactly mirrors economic conditions. So the spike in 2003, 2004 was contra to the overall national economic conditions, but there was a local plant closure in Butler County that drove that enrollment. But you can see starting in 2008, when the bubble burst, and that drove enrollment all the way to 2012, and in 2012, you started to see the inflection point and the economy change direction, and you're still seeing that. So, in general, most people would tell you that we are in economically poor times currently, but we're not seeing a spike in our employment, in our enrollment, right? That's the pandemic. So we are very closely tied to economic sensitivity with our enrollment. But the pandemic buffered that result. In fact, the biggest indicator, single indicator, of our enrollment is last year's local unemployment rate. To the point, if you work out the correlation analysis, there is a 0.7 correlation between last year's unemployment rate and next year's enrollment. You're also seeing the narrative change on enrollment. It's a lot more about workforce, it's a lot more about skilled programs. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue, which is why you're seeing us put on programs like the CDL program, like the diesel program, the welding program, those skilled programs that you can come in, get a skill in a relatively quick time frame and get a job, will become more and more popular as that narrative continues. And then if you look, you can see across the state, so this is all of the two-year institutions in the state, And you can see the 1 year, 3 year, and 5 year changes. Now, a couple there are bucking the trend. State Technical College is bucking the trend, but they had an incredibly low base number to start with. Moberly is bucking the trend, and that was through a partnership in Columbia with Mizzou. So there was a lot of shared enrollment there. But as you can see, we're right there with everybody else, ahead of some, behind a few others. So what is happening to us is a normal pattern that you see across the state and that you see across the nation. So the upside of this is we were prepared before it happened because it was inevitable that it was going to happen. And we made sure that we had everything in order to sustain the economic pattern. And we, I believe, have done a very good job of that, where other colleges have gone through reductions in force, have had to have massive, very negative things happen. We've been able to continue moving forward and serving our students without great disruption. And then retention. This is the other picture of this. We actually do this very well, even though on the surface, those percentages are not necessarily impressive. So a 74% fall to spring retention rate puts you in about the 85th percentile of the nation. Which means 85% of the schools out there do worse than this. Our fall to fall retention has slipped a little bit. A lot of what I think you're seeing there in the fall has a considerable amount to do with the pandemic. We were within some pretty tight control points there for a while, but we saw fall drop off. I think that will come back up. Retention is vitally important to the college's success. And what I want you to understand is a 50% year-to-year retention rate at a 2-year institution actually is not bad when compared to all of the other in the national average. I think 55% puts you in the 90th percentile.
How does this graph go over to the comparison we look to the other colleges, like these numbers compared to the other colleges that we just saw?
They don't readily share that data.
Gotcha.
And I can pull a report from the U.S. Post-Secondary Database, but they don't put the names on it.
Oh.
Because they don't, people get really sensitive about this. It is what it is. This is not something that we just ignore. We look at this constantly, and we work on this really, really hard, and we've got college-wide benchmarks set to push towards for these. So a huge amount of our work is aimed towards retaining students. I think the national story that probably is troubling is those are good numbers. And the underlying piece to this is when you talk to our students about why they didn't return, it has almost nothing to do with us institutionally. It has to do with life happened. Everything from I broke up with my girlfriend and she owned the computer, to my car won't start, to I had a flat tire and couldn't come back. It takes very, very little to disrupt the enrollment pattern of a student that is on the edge. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation insecurity. These things that you hear them talking about are real in our communities that we serve. When you dig in and get high schools to tell you what their true homeless rate is, it's astounding. Because, you know, quite frankly, and I think Dr. Hager is more aware of this than I, there's a way you report, but then there's the things you really know. So if you've got a kid that's bouncing from couch to couch to couch, as far as the state's concerned, they're not homeless. As far as that kid's concerned, they're homeless. They do not have a secure place to stay. And there's a lot of kids out there hopping from one spot to another for shelter. All of that wraps in together, that when they come to us, all those things didn't magically change. And it doesn't take much shift for them to go, wait, my highest priority is not getting to math class. My highest priority is figuring out how I'm going to eat tomorrow. That's why we started the food pantry at the college. That's totally, you know, you don't have to talk about who you are or what's going on. If you need it, we get it to you. And it's significantly utilized. And that's a retention initiative. And it works. So solving these things are sometimes beyond the capability of an institution. It's a life circumstance that we work very hard to moderate, but they're frequently beyond our control. Very, very seldom do we have a student who both their record and their response to us was, I just couldn't hack it. I couldn't do the academics. We've got such a good support system on the learning side and such a good support system on the student services side. We don't hear them telling us, oh man, the schoolwork was just too hard, or I had to get a job. I had to get a second or third job. I couldn't get there because I don't have transportation anymore. Those are the things that truly impact retention, and this is our big hill that we need to climb, is helping our students find a better way. Sometimes it's bad choices. Sometimes it's just circumstances. Our next project is how do we catch this earlier? And how do we come together as a group to support this student and keep them moving forward? Because having a skill is all the difference in the world in saving that future and changing that path. Because once you've got a skill, that skill can't be taken away, and you trade that skill for income. That's what we do.
Online numbers are up because of the pandemic. As we see that start to go back down, we have a way to see how many of those students are not being retained and how many are going back to face-to-face classes.
Oh yeah, we can dice that 1,000 different ways. So we've gotten very good at tracking our students. So this is from our fall registration survey. 326 students responded to this set of questions about virtual learning. Now, keep in mind, when we went totally virtual in the spring, we doubled down and started creating new virtual pathways. We added classes. We went through an entire review process on every class, and we still have more to do. But our students were asked the question, the courses I needed this semester were available online. 91.4% said they were. Huge, huge piece when you consider where we're at now versus where we were in the spring. The courses I'm taking online are easy to navigate. 87.42%. So that sounds like a really simple question, right? It's easy to navigate. The idea here is by creating a virtual course, an online course, where students don't have to spend their time and mental energy trying to figure out where I go in this course, is vital to their success in that course. which is why we went to a unified course pattern. So the first button on the left-hand side is always the same, so forth and so on. So when a student gets into that course, once you figured out one, you figured them all out, fundamentally. Then I can easily communicate with my instructor online, 89.88%. Now, think about that just for a moment. So if you're an online student and you have a question, email is generally the way you're going to go. We also have some video conference capability. Most of the instructors share their personal phone with them in a lot of different ways. But as opposed to if I'm in face-to-face class, have a question, I need some information, catch you after class, catch you before class, catch you in your office hour. What this tells us is that the faculty who were handling and teaching online were attentive to the communication for their students. Because if they were not being responded to, I can guarantee you that number would not be that high. So the communication system worked. And I am supported in the online learning environment. So that's that whole backside piece of this doesn't work the way I thought it did, this doesn't work the way it should. Do I get the support I need when I run into trouble? 91.41%. Exceptionally high response scores, especially when you consider that we went from 0 to about 1,000 miles an hour in 60 seconds. It's the work that this required was monumental and fantastically done. So I'm pleased to announce that Governor Parson, not long ago, released the remainder of our state appropriation. That was about $335,000. That will be a significant budgetary impact to our institution. What that will do is the things that we had pushed into reserve spending, a lot less of that has to happen because of the release of those state allocations. So this actually brings all of the state appropriations that were withheld back to the institution. We of course had budgeted going into this year knowing those funds were being withheld and under a very reasonable assumption that they were not going to come back this year. We dealt a few months ago with the first reallocation of those withholds through a budget amendment, and that will be coming again at some point in the next few months before the fiscal year as we clean this up. So what this did was budgetarily dug us out of a hole that we purposely created with the mindset that, well, this was a crisis, so we're going to allocate reserves instead of trying to cut things that are vital to the institution. Those were wise decisions at the time, and this simply makes those not matter anymore because the government's now paying for them like they promised they would to start with. So a very positive thing. I appreciate Governor Parson for releasing those funds. It will make a huge difference in what our end of the year looks like. So moving into some upcoming events, it is time again to kick off the planning for the coming fiscal year. So our planning cycle actually starts at the end of January to begin planning for the July 1 start of the next fiscal year, following what will now be held as a virtual planning retreat and a number of small meetings after that. Planning will begin happening, and from that planning, budgeting will be developed, culminating in a balanced budget submitted to the board before the beginning of the fiscal year. So hard to believe a year has passed. The new strategic plan, Aspire 2025, is in effect in what we will be planning under for this next cycle. It's going to be a little different. Traditionally, all of the budget managers come together face to face for a full day of discussion about what's happened, where we currently are, and where we're going. So we're doing this one very differently. I think it will work well, but it will require a little bit of adaptability to make this move forward. That, of course, is orchestrated by the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. So here we go. Did I hit the wrong? And that was the only upcoming event. Yes. And that, Madam Chair, is the President's report.
All right, thank you, Dr. Payne. And I believe we have some items for executive session.
Yes, ma'am, we do.
All right. So is there a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, roll call vote.
Trustee Hager.
Yes.
Trustee Garrison.
Yes.
Trustee Shock.
Yes.
Trustee Featherston.
Yes.
Trustee Richardson.
Yes.
I think she's waiting on it.
We're back. Okay, discussion and vote on the Dexter building purchase.
Yeah, so we have been at the Dexter external location for a number of years. The site has worked out well. Most importantly, the Dexter community is very, very supportive of our operation there, more than any other community other than Poplar Bluff. If we need something, the Dexter City has assisted with it. It's been a wonderful relationship. We have some very great programs there. We have our diesel technician program there, our welding program there, as well as a number of general education transfer programs there. So in looking at what the future is, right now we pay approximately $100,000 a year in rent at the Dexter facility. In using the theory that it's always better to build an asset than pay rent if you're going to be committed to a place, and we are committed to Dexter, we entered into discussions with the Dexter Chamber of Commerce, who owns the building that we are located in, and we have forged an agreement that they will count our rent against 100% of our rent will be counted against a purchase price of $850,000 for the next 4 years, and at the end of 4 years, we will purchase the building for the remaining sum of $450,000. This is well below the market valuation on the property. The property, I've lost the word, Gary. When you go and value a property, the appraisal, thank you very much. So the appraisal on that building came in at a little over $1.1 million based on the methodology that they used. That is a reasonable valuation for that. In fact, Trustee Featherston was kind enough to do the research on the building and make sure that we were making a rational decision, as well as that our own head of facilities and the college architect has thoroughly inspected the building and find it to be in excellent condition with a recent new roof. So it is the administration's recommendation that we enter into this agreement for lease purchase of the Dexter facility and move forward.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, roll call vote.
Trustee Hager.
Yes.
Trustee Garrison.
Yes.
Trustee Shock.
Yes, ma'am.
Trustee Featherston.
Yes.
Trustee Richardson.
Yes. On to discussion vote on approval for construction management contract with Sides Construction.
Yes, so Sides Construction is the selected firm to do the improvements to the ball fields and to add a hygiene station to the farm. They entered into the competition based on our request for proposal. There was 2 firms. We interviewed both firms after complete review of myself and the college architect. It was decided that Sides Construction was the appropriate firm to contract with for this work. So it is our recommendation that we enter into this contract with Sides, and I request the board grant the president permission to sign all appropriate documentation thereto.
Any discussion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Roll call vote?
Trustee Hager?
Yes.
Trustee Garrison?
Yes.
Trustee Shock?
Yes.
Trustee Featherston?
Yes.
Trustee Richardson?
Yes. Okay, consideration and approval of revisions to SP 2710 financial aid program.
Right, there is a minor but significant change in the wording to this. Previously, this policy stated that to be eligible for an institutional scholarship, unless you were an international student, you were required to fill out the federal application for student financial aid. However, as we have gone through our scholarship award process, it has become obvious that that's really a foolish way to do this. In many cases, it is important that the student fill out a financial aid document or a financial aid application so that they receive the aid from the feds that they should get. However, many of our students that seek scholarships and are high performing academically are not eligible for financial aid. And there is absolutely no point to put them through that process. So this change simply makes it easier for a group of students that we know from conversation and review, you're not going to get financial aid anyways. We're not going to make you put this through. So we have revised that to say may be required to complete.
I fully support this. I make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call?
Trustee Hager?
Yes.
Trustee Garrison?
Yes.
Trustee Shock?
Yes.
Trustee Featherston?
Yes.
Trustee Richardson?
Yes. Consideration and approval of all personnel actions and associated documents.
I move to approve all personnel actions and associated documents.
I'll second that.
Roll call?
Trustee Hager?
Yes.
Trustee Garrison?
Yes.
Trustee Shock?
Yes.
Trustee Featherston?
Yes.
Trustee Richardson?
Yes.